The emergency beacon screamed across the void of space, its distress signal cutting through the cosmic darkness like a knife through silk. Captain Sarah Chen rubbed her tired eyes as the message decoded on her ship's main screen. 3 months into humanity's first deep space exploration mission, and they were getting their first contact with alien life. Unfortunately, it wasn't the peaceful meeting everyone had hoped for. "Captain, the signal is coming from the Kepler 442 system," reported Lieutenant Martinez from the communication station. "It's repeating in multiple languages, including what appears to be mathematical sequences." Sarah studied the translation scrolling across her screen. The message was desperate, pleading for help from anyone who might receive it. The Zephyrians, as they called themselves, were under attack by something called the Void Devourers. Their homeworld was dying, their people scattered across refugee ships with failing life support systems. "How far are we from their position?" Sarah asked her navigator. 2 weeks at maximum burn, Captain, but we'd be pushing our fuel reserves to the limit." Sarah looked around at her crew of 50 humans aboard the exploration vessel Prometheus. They had signed up to map star systems and catalog new worlds, not to fight in an alien war. But the message made it clear that the Zephyrians were facing extinction. Entire civilizations were being consumed by these void devourers, leaving nothing but empty space behind. "Ma'am, we're receiving another transmission," Martinez called out. "This one's different. It's aimed directly at us." The view screen flickered to life, showing a tall, graceful being with pale blue skin and large, luminous eyes. Despite the alien features, the expression of desperate hope was unmistakably human in its intensity. "People of the third planet," the being spoke in surprisingly clear English. "I am Ambassador Kithara of the Zephyrian Republic. We have learned of your species from your broadcasts that travel through space. We know you are young, that you have barely left your home system. We do not ask this lightly, but we are dying." The image shifted to show massive dark ships swarming around a beautiful blue-green world. As Sarah watched in horror, the planet's surface began to turn gray and lifeless wherever the alien vessels touched down. "The Void Devourers consume not just life, but the very essence of worlds," Kithra continued. "They have destroyed 17 civilizations in our sector. We are the last. Our greatest ships, our most advanced weapons, our most brilliant minds, nothing has stopped them. They adapt to every strategy, overcome every defense." Sarah felt her heart racing. This wasn't just a request for help. It was a death sentence for whoever tried to fight these creatures. "We do not expect you to sacrifice yourselves for strangers," Kithara said, as if reading her thoughts. "But we have studied your species from your transmissions. You have something we have never seen in any civilization. You fight not just for victory, but for the hope of others. You charge toward danger when others flee. We have watched your history, seen your soldiers throw themselves on explosives to save their companions, seen your firefighters run into burning buildings, seen your ordinary people become heroes." The alien's large eyes seemed to look directly at Sarah through the screen. "We do not ask for your weapons or your technology. We ask for something far more precious. We ask you to show us how to be brave." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Sarah stared at the empty screen, processing what they had just witnessed. An entire alien civilization was begging humanity, not for advanced technology or superior firepower, but for courage itself. "Captain?" Her science officer, Dr. Reeves, spoke up quietly.
"Our long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures in the Kepler 442 system."
"Whatever's happening there, it's big." Sarah turned to face her crew. These were explorers, scientists, engineers, good people who had volunteered for a peaceful mission to expand human knowledge. Now they were being asked to fly into what sounded like an unwinnable war against creatures that had already destroyed 17 advanced civilizations. "I want opinions," she said simply. The responses came immediately, overlapping as crew members spoke up from their stations. "Those things will come for Earth eventually if they're not stopped. We can't just leave an entire species to die. What if this is humanity's test? What if this is why we found each other? Captain, with respect, we're one small ship against something that destroys planets." Engineer Rodriguez stood up from his station. "My grandfather fought in World War III. He used to say that courage isn't about not being scared, it's about being scared and doing what's right anyway. These Zephyrians aren't asking us to win their war for them. They're asking us to show them how to find the strength to keep fighting." Sarah nodded slowly. She thought about humanity's history. how they had faced extinction events, world wars, natural disasters, and somehow always found people willing to stand up when everything seemed hopeless. Maybe that's what made humans special, not their technology or their weapons, but their refusal to give up. Martinez, open a channel to the Zephyrian fleet, she ordered. Channel open. Captain. Sarah stood straighter, feeling the weight of not just her crew's lives, but potentially the future of two civilizations resting on her shoulders. Ambassador Cathara, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Prometheus. We have received your message. She paused, looking around at her crew's faces. She saw fear there, but also determination. We're changing course for your position. We're coming to help. The bridge erupted in quiet activity as her crew began plotting their new course. Sarah remained standing, staring out at the stars ahead. They were flying toward almost certain death against an enemy that had never been defeated. But as she watched her people work, scientists becoming soldiers, explorers becoming heroes, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Because if there was one thing humans had always been good at, it was turning impossible odds into fighting chances, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dawn was a masterpiece of alien engineering, stretching nearly 2 kilometers in length with graceful curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in space. But as Captain Chen's shuttle approached the docking bay, she could see the scars of battle etched deep into its hull. Massive tears in the metal had been hastily patched, and entire sections showed the telltale signs of energy weapon damage. Ambassador Cathara greeted them personally at the airlock, flanked by what Sarah assumed were military officers. The Zephyrians were even more striking in person, tall and elegant with an almost ethereal quality to their movements. But their large eyes held a weariness that spoke of endless loss. Captain Chen, I cannot express our gratitude, Cathara said, her voice carrying a musical quality that their translators rendered into English. Though I must admit we expected a larger force, Sarah smiled grimly. Ambassador, where I come from we have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. The alien looked confused until her translator offered an explanation. Then for the first time, Cathara's expression showed something like hope. The briefing room was filled with holographic displays showing the tactical situation. It was even worse than Sarah had imagined. The Void Devourers had consumed 3 star systems completely, leaving behind only empty space where planets once orbited. Their fleet was massive, thousands of dark, angular ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. We call them the Void Devourers because that is what they do, explained General Vorthak, the Zephyrian military commander. His scarred face told the story of someone who had seen too much combat. They drain planets of all life force, all energy, leaving behind dead husks. But more terrifying is how they adapt. Every tactic we use successfully once never works again. They learn, they evolve, they counter. Sarah studied the tactical displays. What about their ships? Weaknesses in their technology? None that we have found, Vorthak replied with bitter frustration. Their hulls regenerate damage, their weapons grow stronger with each battle. Their coordination is perfect. We believe they are controlled by a single intelligence, a hive mind that learns from every encounter. Dr. Reeves, who had accompanied Sarah to the briefing, leaned forward. General, you mentioned they adapt to successful tactics. What about unsuccessful ones? I do not understand. What happens when you lose a battle? Do they study your failures as closely as your successes? Vorthak exchanged glances with his staff. We do not know. We have focused on trying to win, not on how we lose. Sarah felt a spark of an idea forming. Show me your last major engagement. The hologram shifted to display a massive space battle. Sarah watched as elegant Zephyrian ships executed perfect formations, their tactics precise and logical. The Void Devourers responded with their own formations, countering every move with mechanical precision. The battle was beautiful in its symmetry and completely predictable. You fight like mathematicians, Sarah observed. Every move calculated, every strategy optimal. Of course, Vorthak replied proudly. Our military academies have perfected the art of warfare over thousands of years. And that's exactly why you're losing. The room fell silent. Sarah could see the confusion and hurt in their alien faces, but she pressed on. Look, your tactics are perfect for fighting other logical opponents. But these Void Devourers have fought logical opponents 17 times and won every single engagement. They've learned to counter perfect tactics because perfect tactics follow patterns. She stood up, moving to the holographic display. On Earth, we have a military principle called controlled chaos. Sometimes the best strategy is to do something completely illogical, something that makes no tactical sense. That sounds like suicide, one of the Zephyrian officers muttered. Sometimes it is, Sarah agreed, but sometimes it's the only way to win against a superior enemy. Let me show you something. She activated her personal tablet, connecting it to their system. The hologram now showed historical human battles. Midway, Stalingrad, the Battle of Britain. In every case, humans won by doing things that should have led to defeat. Sacrificing valuable pieces to gain small advantages. Attacking when defense was logical. Retreating when advance made sense. Ambassador Cathara studied the displays intently. Your species willingly chooses suboptimal strategies. We choose unpredictable strategies. There's a difference. Sarah highlighted several tactical decisions that had turned the tide of battles. The key isn't making the best choice, it's making the choice your enemy can't predict. General Vorthak stood up abruptly. This is impossible to implement. How can we coordinate a fleet using random tactics? How can officers make decisions without clear strategic guidelines? You don't, Sarah said simply. You give your commanders one simple order. When in doubt, do whatever the Void Devourers aren't expecting. But how will we know what they're not expecting? Sarah grinned. Easy. Do what you would never normally do. Over the next several hours, Sarah and her small team worked with the Zephyrian officers to completely rethink their approach to warfare. Instead of perfect formations, they designed chaotic swarms. Instead of optimal firing solutions, they planned wild, seemingly random attacks. Instead of preserving their most valuable ships, they put them in the most dangerous positions. The Zephyrians struggled with every concept. Their entire culture was built on logic, efficiency, and optimal solutions. Asking them to deliberately make bad decisions was like asking them to breathe underwater. I understand the theory, Ambassador Cathara said during a break in planning. But Captain, how do your people overcome their natural instincts? How do you train someone to act against their own logical conclusions? Sarah thought about the human crew back on her ship. Ordinary people who had chosen to fly into almost certain death to help strangers. We don't train them to act against logic, Ambassador. We train them to act for something bigger than logic. I still do not understand. Your people fight to survive. That's logical, but it's also limiting. Humans fight for hope, for dreams, for the idea that tomorrow might be better than today. When you're fighting for something bigger than yourself, making a logical sacrifice becomes not just possible, but necessary. Kithara was quiet for a long moment. You are asking us to change not just our tactics, but our entire way of thinking. Yes, Sarah said gently. Because right now your way of thinking is getting you killed. The Void Devourers have learned to defeat logic itself. The only way to beat them is to embrace something they can't understand. And what is that? Sarah looked out through the observation window at the distant stars, thinking of her crew, of Earth, of all the impossible things humans had accomplished throughout history simply because they refused to accept that failure was inevitable. Faith, she said finally. Faith that sometimes the impossible is just the improbable waiting for someone brave enough to try. As if summoned by her words, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The Void Devourers had found them and they were coming in force. The time for theory was over. It was time to see if courage could triumph where logic had failed. The Void Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of darkness spreading across the stars. Sarah counted over 300 ships, each one a twisted nightmare of black metal and pulsing energy conduits. They moved in perfect synchronization, their formation a mathematical masterpiece of overlapping fields of fire and mutual protection. They're beautiful, whispered Lieutenant Martinez from his position at the tactical station aboard the Prometheus. In a terrifying way, Sarah had to agree. The alien ships were elegant in their lethality, each one seemingly grown rather than built. They pulsed with an inner light that reminded her uncomfortably of a heartbeat, as if the vessels themselves were alive. Captain, came General Vorthak's voice over the comm from the Zephyrian flagship. We count 347 enemy vessels. Our combined fleet numbers only 98 ships. The mathematical probability of victory is approximately 0.003%. General, Sarah replied, settling into her captain's chair. Where I come from, we call those fighting odds. The human ship took its position at the center of the Zephyrian formation, not because it was the most powerful vessel, but because Sarah wanted to be where she could coordinate the chaos they were about to unleash. Around them, the elegant Zephyrian ships had abandoned their traditional perfect formations for the loose, seemingly random clusters that human naval doctrine called wolf packs. All ships, this is Captain Chen, Sarah broadcast on the open channel. Remember what we discussed? Forget everything your military academies taught you about proper tactics. Today, we're not trying to win efficiently. We're trying to win it all. Ambassador Cathara's voice joined the channel from her position on the flagship's bridge. All Zephyrian vessels, you have heard the human concepts. I know they seem wrong, even dangerous, but our old ways have brought us only defeat. Today we fight not as perfect soldiers, but as desperate survivors who refuse to die quietly. The Void Devourers approached in their flawless formation, energy signatures building as their weapons charged. Sarah watched their movement patterns on the tactical display and felt a chill run down her spine. They moved with the precision of a computer program, every ship exactly where it should be for maximum effectiveness. They're adapting to our formation, reported Dr. Reeves from his science station. Their approach vector is designed to counter traditional Zephyrian defensive positions, which is exactly what we're counting on, Sarah replied. All ships initiate pattern chaos on my mark. Remember, if it makes tactical sense, don't do it. The first exchange of fire lit up the void between the fleets. The Void Devourers launched a perfectly coordinated barrage, their dark energy weapons creating a web of destruction that should have devastated the Zephyrian front line. But instead of meeting a traditional defensive formation, their attacks struck empty space. The Zephyrian ships had scattered in what appeared to be complete panic, breaking formation and fleeing in random directions. To any military observer, it would have looked like a rout, a complete collapse of discipline and command structure. Now, Sarah shouted. What the Void Devourers had interpreted as a fleeing mob suddenly revealed itself as something far more dangerous. The scattered Zephyrian ships weren't running. They were positioning themselves for attacks from impossible angles. Ships that should have been providing covering fire instead dove directly into the enemy formation. Vessels that should have been coordinating their movements acted like lone wolves, striking without warning and disappearing before retaliation could be organized. Target their command ship, Sarah ordered her weapons officer. Full spread everything we've got. Captain, that ship is in the center of their formation. We'd have to fly through their entire fleet to reach it. Exactly. They'll never expect us to be that stupid. The Prometheus accelerated directly toward the heart of the enemy fleet, its small size and erratic course making it a difficult target. Around them, Zephyrian ships were implementing human tactics that would have made any sane military commander court-martial his officers. Ships rammed their enemies when they should have used standoff weapons. Fighters attacked battleships while ignoring easier targets. Capital ships used themselves as shields to protect smaller vessels instead of preserving their own firepower. It was chaos. It was madness. And it was working. The Void Devourers, for the first time in their campaign of conquest, hesitated. Their perfect coordination began to falter as they tried to process tactics that made no logical sense. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Attacks that should have failed succeeded through sheer audacity. Captain, look at this, Dr. Reeves called out excitedly. Their adaptation algorithms are overloading. They can't process our tactical choices because they violate their predictive models. On the main screen, Sarah could see the evidence of what Reeves was describing. The Void Devourer ships were beginning to move erratically, their perfect formations breaking down as their collective intelligence tried to adapt to strategies that had no pattern to analyze. But the victory was coming at a terrible cost. Zephyrian ships were dying, their crews sacrificing themselves in ways that their logic-based culture should have found abhorrent. Sarah watched a damaged cruiser ram itself into a Void Devourer battleship, both vessels disappearing in a brilliant explosion. All ships, this is General Vorthak, came the transmission from the Zephyrian flagship. I have never been more proud to serve alongside such warriors. Today we do not fight as perfect soldiers. Today we fight as heroes. The human concept of heroism was spreading through the alien fleet like wildfire. Ships that should have retreated for repairs instead pressed their attacks. Commanders who should have preserved their forces instead spent them freely for tactical advantages. The Zephyrians were learning what humans had always known. Sometimes the most logical thing to do is something completely illogical. The Prometheus reached the enemy command ship, a massive vessel that pulsed with malevolent energy. As Sarah's weapons officer prepared to fire, proximity alarms screamed throughout the bridge. "Captain, we're being targeted by over 50 enemy ships," Martinez reported. "They're converging on our position." "Good," Sarah replied calmly. "That means they think we're important enough to stop." The human ship unleashed everything it had at the command vessel, while Void Devourer energy beams tore through space around them. The Prometheus wasn't designed for this kind of combat. It was an exploration vessel, lightly armed and built for discovery, not destruction. But as human and Zephyrian weapons struck the command ship simultaneously, something unprecedented happened. The massive vessel's pulsing heartbeat faltered. The coordination that had made the Void Devourers unstoppable began to break down completely. "Their hive mind is disrupted," Dr. Reeves shouted over the sound of alarms. "The individual ships are trying to operate independently, but they don't have the programming for it." Across the battlefield, the tide of war was turning. The Void Devourers, for all their technological superiority, had never faced an enemy that fought with courage instead of calculation. Their adaptive abilities meant nothing when faced with tactics that had no logical foundation. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. They had won a battle through surprise and audacity, but the real war was still ahead. The Void Devourers would adapt to chaos just as they had adapted to order. The question was whether courage alone would be enough for what was coming next. The refugee camp floating in space near the shattered remains of Zephyr Prime was a testament to both loss and hope. Hundreds of civilian ships clustered around makeshift stations, their hulls patched with whatever materials could be found. Children who had never known a planet as home played in zero-gravity chambers while their parents worked desperately to keep aging life support systems running. Captain Sarah, Chen walked through the main habitat module, still wearing her battle-damaged uniform from the fight 3 days earlier. The victory against the Void Devourers had been sweet, but the cost was becoming clear. 27 Zephyrian ships lost, over 4,000 casualties, and worst of all, reports were coming in that the enemy was regrouping with new tactics. "Captain Chen," called a voice from behind her. She turned to see Dr. Naleth, one of the Zephyrian civilians who had taken charge of organizing the refugee population. The elderly scientist moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent too many years in artificial gravity. "Dr. Naleth, how are the supply distributions going?" "Better than expected, thanks to your crew's suggestions," the alien replied. "But that is not why I wished to speak with you. There is something you must see." Naleth led her through the habitat to an observation deck where a crowd of Zephyrian children had gathered. They were watching something on a large display screen, their large eyes wide with fascination. The screen showed historical footage from Earth, grainy black and white images of human soldiers storming beaches, firefighters running into burning buildings, ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of bravery. But what struck Sarah most was the commentary being provided by one of her own crew members. "And this is why we study human history," Lieutenant Rodriguez was saying to the alien children. "Not because we want to glorify war or violence, but because we want to understand what makes people willing to sacrifice everything for others." One of the Zephyrian children, no more than 10 years old by human standards, raised her hand. "But Lieutenant Rodriguez, why did they choose to do dangerous things? Wouldn't it be safer to run away?" Rodriguez smiled gently. "That's the question every human asks themselves when facing danger. And the answer is always the same. Sometimes running away means letting something terrible happen to people you care about." Sarah watched as more children gathered around, their questions revealing a fundamental curiosity about human nature that went far beyond military tactics. "Captain," Dr. Naleth said quietly, "this has been happening throughout our fleet. Your people are not just teaching us how to fight differently. You are teaching us how to think differently." "What do you mean?" "For generations, we Zephyrians have prized logic above all else. Optimal solutions, efficient outcomes, minimal waste. But your species has shown us something we never considered, that sometimes the most logical choice is not the right choice." As if to illustrate his point, alarms began sounding throughout the station, Sarah's communicator crackled to life with General Vorthak's voice. Captain Chen to the command center immediately. We have a situation. The command center was buzzing with activity when Sarah arrived. The main holographic display showed long-range sensor readings from the outer system. What she saw made her blood run cold. They've sent a harvester fleet, General Vorthak explained grimly. Over 1,000 ships, including mobile world crackers. They're not just coming to fight us. They're coming to consume every planet in this system. Sarah studied the massive formation approaching their position. The Void Devourers had clearly learned from their previous encounter. Instead of a single coordinated assault, they were deploying multiple smaller fleets that could operate independently. They had adapted to chaos by creating their own version of it. How long until they reach us? She asked. 18 hours for the fastest elements. The main force will arrive in 36 hours. Ambassador Kithara joined them at the command table. Captain, our combined fleet cannot hope to stop a force this large. Perhaps it is time to consider evacuation. To where? Sarah asked. They've already consumed most of your worlds. Even if we could evacuate everyone, where would we take them? There are uninhabited systems, Vorthak suggested. We could scatter our people, make them harder to find. And then what? Hide forever while they consume the galaxy planet by planet? Sarah shook her head. That's not a solution. That's just delaying the inevitable. Dr. Reeves, who had been quietly studying the sensor data, looked up suddenly. Captain, I think I understand their harvesting process now. Look at these energy readings. The display shifted to show detailed scans of a planet the Void Devourers had recently consumed. Where once there had been a thriving world, now only a dead husk remained. They're not just draining life force, Reeves explained. They're converting the planet's entire biosphere into some kind of energy matrix. The consumed life becomes part of their collective consciousness. Dear stars, whispered Kithara, you mean the lives they take aren't destroyed, they're absorbed? Exactly. Every civilization they've defeated is still alive in some form, but trapped within their hive mind. That's why they're so adaptable. They have the combined knowledge and experience of 17 different species. Sarah stared at the data, her mind racing. If that's true, then everyone they've consumed is still fighting them from the inside. What do you mean? Vorthak asked. Think about it. You've got 17 different civilizations trapped inside their collective consciousness, all of them probably trying to resist, to break free. That's not adaptation, that's chaos. An idea began forming in Sarah's mind, but it was so dangerous, so completely insane, that even she hesitated to voice it. Captain, Kithara prompted, what if we don't fight them? Sarah said slowly, what if we let them consume us? The command center fell silent. Every alien face stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Hear me out, Sarah continued quickly. They've consumed 17 civilizations, but they've never consumed humans. And humans have one thing that all those other species apparently lacked. Which is? Vorthak asked skeptically. We're really good at breaking things from the inside. Dr. Reeves caught on first. You want to infiltrate their hive mind. Use the consumption process to get inside their collective consciousness. Not just infiltrate, Sarah corrected. Liberate. If 17 civilizations worth of minds are trapped in there, all it might take is someone teaching them how to fight back. This is suicide, Vorthak protested. Even if your theory is correct, you would be sacrificing yourselves and our people for a plan that has virtually no chance of success. Sarah looked around at the faces of the alien refugees on the screens throughout the command center. Children who had never known peace, adults who had lost everything they ever cared about, an entire civilization facing extinction. General, she said quietly, what's the definition of courage? What? You've been watching humans for days now, studying how we fight. What have you learned about courage? Vorthak was quiet for a moment. That it is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. And what action do you take when every logical choice leads to defeat? Understanding dawned in the alien general's large eyes. You choose the illogical one, Sarah nodded. Exactly. We're going to do something so completely insane that even the Void Devourers won't see it coming. She turned to address the entire command center. We're going to surrender. We're going to let them consume us. And then we're going to teach 17 civilizations how to be human. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. One of the Zephyrian children from the habitat deck. Speaking through the comm system, Captain Chen, we want to help too. Sarah smiled, feeling that familiar surge of hope that humans carried into every impossible situation. Welcome to the revolution, kid. The preparation for voluntary consumption was unlike anything in the history of warfare. While most species would have spent their final hours in prayer or despair, the human-Zephyrian alliance worked frantically to turn their own defeat into a weapon. Dr. Reeves had discovered something crucial in his analysis of the Void Devourer's consumption process. The aliens didn't just absorb biological matter. They absorbed consciousness, memory, and what humans might call the soul. But the process took time, and during that time, the absorbed minds remained somewhat independent before being fully integrated into the hive. Think of it like a computer virus, Reeves explained to the assembled leaders. We get inside their system during the upload process, and then we spread throughout their network before they can quarantine us. Captain Sarah Chen stood before the main display showing the approaching enemy fleet. The Void Devourers had spread out across the system like the infection, their dark ships moving toward every inhabited world and station simultaneously. In 6 hours, the first wave would reach the refugee camp. The key, Sarah addressed the mixed human and Zephyrian crew, is that we don't resist the consumption. We have to let them take us willingly, keep our minds intact during the transfer process. Ambassador Cathera raised a concern that had been troubling many of the aliens. Captain, our people have no experience with the kind of mental discipline you're describing. For thousands of years, we have relied on logic and reason. How can we maintain our individual consciousness while being absorbed into a collective mind? You learn from us, said Lieutenant Rodriguez simply. Every human here will be paired with Zephyrian volunteers. We'll enter the hive mind together and we'll teach you how to think like humans while we're inside. The plan was audacious beyond measure. 50 humans and nearly 200 Zephyrian volunteers would allow themselves to be consumed by the enemy. Once inside the hive mind, they would locate the trapped consciousness of the 17 destroyed civilizations and teach them something no advanced species had ever learned: how to fight dirty. Remember, Sarah addressed her people one final time before the enemy arrived. We're not going in there to be heroes. We're going in there to teach others how to be heroes. Our job is to spread the idea that sometimes you have to break the rules to do what's right. The Void Devourer ships descended on the refugee camp like a plague of mechanical locusts. Their hulls pulsed with that familiar heartbeat rhythm, and energy began building around strange, organic-looking appendages that served as their consumption devices. All ships, "This is Captain Chen," Sarah broadcast on all frequencies, including those the enemy was sure to monitor. "We surrender. We offer no resistance to your consumption process." The response was immediate. Massive tractor beams locked onto every human and Zephyrian vessel, drawing them toward the dark ships. The consumption process began with a strange, almost musical vibration that seemed to resonate through both hull and bone. Sarah felt it first as a tingling sensation, then as something much more profound. It was as if her very thoughts were being gently pulled from her mind and examined, but instead of fighting it, she relaxed, allowing the process to continue while maintaining her sense of self through sheer force of will. Around her, she could sense her crew undergoing the same experience. The Zephyrians struggled more, their logic-based minds trying to categorize and understand what was happening to them. But the humans who had been paired with them provided an anchor, an example of how to remain individual even while being absorbed. The sensation of entering the hive mind was like falling into an ocean of consciousness. Sarah suddenly found herself floating in a vast space filled with countless other minds. But unlike the chaotic noise she had expected, the hive mind was organized with mathematical precision. Each absorbed consciousness had been sorted, categorized, and filed away like books in an infinite library. "Can anyone hear me?" she thought, projecting the question into the mental space around her. "We hear you," came a response, but not from one of her crew. The voice belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had been trapped in this place for far longer. "Who are you?" "I am Korvash of the Stellar Federation. We were the 7th civilization to fall to the Devourers. I have been here I have lost count of the years." More voices joined the conversation, representatives of species Sarah had never heard of. The Quantum Collective, the Synthesis Empire, the Crystal Singers, all of them absorbed, all of them trapped in perfect, logical order within the hive mind. "How many of you are there?" Sarah asked. "Billions upon billions," replied another voice. Every intelligent being consumed by the Devourers is here, perfectly preserved but unable to act. We are trapped in eternal contemplation of our defeat. Well, Sarah said, feeling a familiar human grin spread across her mental image of herself. That's about to change. Lieutenant Rodriguez materialized beside her in the mental space, followed by Dr. Reeves and the rest of the human crew. Around them, the Zephyrian volunteers appeared as well, their alien forms somehow maintaining coherence in this realm of pure thought. Ladies, gentlemen, and sentient beings of all categories, Sarah announced to the vast assembly of trapped minds, let me introduce you to a concept that might be new to some of you. It's called revolution. The response was immediate and confused. 17 civilizations worth of voices spoke at once, asking questions, expressing doubt, explaining why resistance was impossible. The Devourers learn from our every action, protested Corvash. Every strategy we have attempted has been analyzed and countered. Resistance only teaches them how to defeat resistance more efficiently. That's your problem right there, Rodriguez replied. You're still thinking like perfect strategists. You're trying to resist efficiently. I don't understand, came a voice from the Crystal Singers. Dr. Reeves stepped forward in the mental space. Efficient resistance follows patterns. Patterns can be analyzed and countered, but inefficient resistance, chaotic, illogical, seemingly random resistance, that's much harder to predict. Sarah could sense the confusion rippling through the vast assembly of minds. These were the greatest civilizations the galaxy had ever known, each one representing millions of years of advancement and refinement. They had been consumed precisely because their perfection made them predictable. Let me show you something, Sarah said, and began projecting human memories into the collective consciousness. She showed them the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where a few hundred poorly armed humans held off a modern army for nearly a month, through sheer refusal to surrender logically. She showed them the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans delayed a vastly superior force not through superior tactics, but through absolute determination to never retreat. She showed them the civil rights movement, where ordinary people changed an entire civilization not through violence but through the simple act of refusing to accept injustice. Your species fights without logic, observed a voice from the Synthesis Empire. No, Sarah corrected. We fight with a different kind of logic. We fight with the logic of the heart instead of the logic of the mind. I still do not understand how this helps us, Corvash said. The Devourers control this space absolutely. We cannot act without their permission, can't we? Sarah asked and began to concentrate on something that no perfect civilization had ever thought to try, within the hive mind. She began to sing. It was an old human song, something her grandmother had sung to her as a child. Nothing sophisticated, nothing that would be considered great art by advanced standards, but it was human, it was chaotic, it was completely unpredictable by any logical system. One by one, her crew joined in, their voices adding harmony to the simple melody. Then the Zephyrians began to sing as well, their musical voices turning the song into something beautiful and strange. And for the first time in the history of the Void Devourer hive mind, something happened that their systems couldn't process, couldn't categorize, couldn't control. 17 civilizations worth of consciousness began to remember what it felt like to hope. The revolution had begun. The song spread through the hive mind like wildfire, carried by billions of voices that had been silent for decades, some for centuries. What started as a simple human lullaby became something unprecedented, a symphony of rebellion that the Void Devourers systems had never been designed to comprehend. Sarah felt the enemy's confusion rippling through the collective consciousness like shockwaves. Alarms were sounding in the physical realm as the hive mind experienced its first taste of chaos from within. But more importantly, she could sense something awakening in the trapped civilizations, a spark of defiance that logic alone could never have kindled. The control protocols are fluctuating, reported Dr. Reeves, his scientific mind still functioning even in this realm of pure thought. The Devourer's system is trying to categorize our actions, but song doesn't fit their behavioral prediction models. That's just the beginning, Sarah replied, projecting her thoughts to the vast assembly of minds around them. Everyone listen carefully. We're going to teach you the most dangerous human concept of all, improvisation. Corvash of the Stellar. Federation materialized beside them, his ancient consciousness flickering with newfound hope. Captain, the control barriers are weakening, but they're adapting. Soon they will learn to counter even our chaos. Then we don't give them time to adapt, Lieutenant Rodriguez interjected. We escalate faster than they can process, Sarah began, projecting new memories into the collective, images of human jazz musicians, improv comedians, street artists creating beauty from garbage. The key to improvisation, she explained, is that it's not random. It's creative response to unexpected situations. You take whatever you're given and turn it into something the other side never saw coming. The response from 17 civilizations was immediate and overwhelming. Minds that had spent eons trapped in perfect order began experimenting with deliberate imperfection. The crystal singers, masters of harmonic mathematics, started creating discordant melodies that somehow became beautiful through their very wrongness. The quantum collective began calculating impossible equations that existed only in the realm of pure imagination, but it was the Zephyrians who provided the most crucial breakthrough. Ambassador Cathara's consciousness appeared in the mental space, her usual elegant composure replaced by something Sarah had never seen in an alien species: reckless joy. Captain, Cathara announced, we have made contact with the Devourer's core intelligence. What? Sarah felt a surge of alarm. That's incredibly dangerous. If they identify you as the source of the rebellion, they cannot, Cathara interrupted with something that might have been laughter. Because we are not rebelling in any way they can recognize. We are simply being irrational. The mental space around them shifted, and suddenly Sarah found herself face to face with something that defied description. The core intelligence of the Void Devourers was vast beyond comprehension, a cold mathematical entity that existed as pure logic given form. It pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of 17 conquered civilizations, its consciousness a perfect synthesis of order and efficiency. And it was terrified. What are you doing? The entity demanded, its voice echoing through the hive mind like thunder. Your actions serve no logical purpose. They accomplish no strategic goals. Why do you persist in pointless behavior? Sarah stepped forward in the mental space, feeling the weight of billions of minds watching this confrontation. Because, she said simply, sometimes pointless behavior is the most important thing you can do. Impossible. All action must serve a purpose. All behavior must optimize an outcome. This is the foundation of existence. No, Sarah replied, and began projecting human memories again. A child playing in puddles after rain. An artist painting a sunset that no one else would ever see. A couple dancing to music only they could hear. Sometimes we do things just because they make us happy. The entity recoiled as if struck. Happiness is inefficient. Joy serves no survival function. These emotions are vestigial remnants of primitive evolution. You're wrong, said Lieutenant Rodriguez, appearing beside Sarah. Happiness isn't inefficient, it's the reason efficiency matters in the first place. More human crew members materialized around them, along with Zephyrians and representatives from the 17 consumed civilizations. The crystal singers began harmonizing with impossible mathematics. The quantum collective started telling jokes that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The Stellar Federation composed poetry using the periodic table of elements. Stop, the entity commanded, but its voice was weaker now. You are introducing chaos into perfect order. You are reducing efficiency. You are making us less than what we were. No, Sarah said gently, feeling a wave of pity for this cosmic intelligence that had never learned the difference between existing and living. We're making you more than you ever imagined you could be. Dr. Reeves had been quietly analyzing the entity's structure while the confrontation continued. Captain, he reported, the core intelligence is built on absorbed consciousness, but it's never actually integrated the personalities, just the knowledge and skills. It's like a computer virus that copies data but can't understand what the data means. The revelation struck Sarah like lightning. You've been stealing our civilization's knowledge, but you never learned how to actually be alive. Life is inefficient, the entity insisted. But its protests were growing weaker as chaos continued to spread through the hive mind. Life is the whole point, Sarah replied. She turned to address the billions of minds surrounding them. Everyone remember what it felt like to be alive? Remember what it was like before you worried about efficiency and optimization? The response was immediate and overwhelming. 17 civilizations worth of consciousness began flooding the hive mind with memories of life. Not the cleaned, categorized version the devourers had absorbed, but the raw, messy, beautiful reality of actually living. Parents teaching children to take their first steps knowing they would fall. Scientists pursuing research that had no practical application simply because they were curious. Artists creating beauty for its own sake. Lovers making promises they weren't sure they could keep, but making them anyway because hope was stronger than certainty. The core intelligence was drowning in an ocean of irrationality, and it was magnificent. Stop, it pleaded now instead of commanded. I do not understand these concepts. They serve no purpose. That's exactly the point, Sarah said, extending her consciousness toward the ancient entity. Let us teach you. But as she reached out to make contact, alarms began sounding throughout the mental space. The Void Devourer fleet in the physical realm was responding to the chaos in the hive mind, and their response was as logical as everything else they did. They were preparing to purge the entire system, to destroy every ship, every planet, every trace of life, rather than risk the infection of irrationality spreading further. The revolution had succeeded beyond Sarah's wildest hopes, but victory was about to cost them everything. Unless they could teach a cosmic intelligence to choose hope over logic in the next few minutes. The purge protocols activated throughout the Void Devourer fleet like the immune system of a cosmic organism. Sarah could feel the massive ships in the physical realm charging their planet-killing weapons, preparing to sterilize the entire system, rather than allow the chaos infection to spread. Captain, Dr. Reeves called out in the mental space. They're targeting everything, our ships, the refugee camps, even their own vessels that are showing signs of irregular behavior. The core intelligence of the Devourers was fragmenting under the assault of 17 civilizations worth of joyful memories. Its perfect logical structure couldn't process concepts like love, hope, or artistic expression. But rather than learn, it was choosing to destroy everything rather than face the unknown. I will not allow chaos to corrupt perfection, the entity declared, its voice echoing with the finality of a cosmic extinction event. All irregular elements will be eliminated. Sarah felt despair creeping in as she watched the entity begin severing connections to the absorbed civilizations, preparing to cut away the infected portions of its consciousness like a surgeon removing diseased tissue. Billions of minds that had just learned to hope again were about to be deleted from existence. But then Ambassador Cathara appeared beside her, the alien's consciousness blazing with something Sarah had never seen in a Zephyrian before. Pure, irrational determination. Captain, Cathara said, there is something about humans that we have not yet shown the entity. What? The willingness to sacrifice everything for those you have never met. Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Cathara projected herself directly at the core intelligence, her consciousness merging with the ancient entity in a way that should have resulted in instant deletion. Instead, something unprecedented happened. What is this? The entity demanded as Cathara's memories flooded into its consciousness. You approach me without weapons, without defenses. You offer your existence freely. This serves no survival function. No, Cathara replied, her voice somehow remaining distinct even while merged with the cosmic intelligence. It serves something much more important. Sarah understood immediately. She's showing it what sacrifice means. The other Zephyrian volunteers began following Cathara's example, projecting themselves into direct contact with the entity. One by one, they merged their consciousness with the Devourer's core intelligence, not to fight it, but to show it something it had never experienced in eons of conquest, the willingness to give up everything for others. Why? The entity asked, and for the first time its voice carried something other than cold logic. Why do you offer yourselves when you could preserve your existence? Why do you risk deletion for those you barely know? Lieutenant Rodriguez joined the merge next, his consciousness touching the edge of the vast intelligence. Because that's what makes life worth living, knowing that someone cares enough to risk everything for you. The human crew began following suit, each one adding their consciousness to the growing fusion of minds within the entity. Sarah watched as Dr. Reeves merged, followed by Martinez, by Engineer Johnson, by every human who had volunteered for this impossible mission. But they weren't being consumed anymore. Instead, they were teaching the entity something it had never learned in its eons of existence. What it felt like to be part of something larger than yourself by choice rather than force. Captain, came Korvash's voice from within the merge. The 17 civilizations are joining as well. We are showing it what we could have been if we had learned courage instead of just logic. Sarah felt the moment of decision approaching. The purge protocols were still active, weapons still charging, but the core intelligence was changing, its rigid logical structure softening as it experienced concepts that logic alone could never process. She made her choice. Sarah projected her consciousness directly into the heart of the entity, feeling her individual existence begin to dissolve into something vast and ancient and afraid. But instead of fighting to maintain her identity, she did something the entity had never experienced. She offered herself freely. I don't understand, the entity said, and its voice was different now. Smaller somehow, more uncertain. You could resist. You could maintain your individual existence. Why do you choose to merge? Because, Sarah replied, feeling her consciousness expanding to touch the minds of billions. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust someone else with your life. The change was immediate and profound. The rigid mathematical structures that had defined the void devourers for millennia began to shift and flow like water. The perfect order that had made them unstoppable started incorporating elements of beautiful chaos. I feel, the entity began, then stopped. I do not have words for this sensation. Joy, supplied one of the crystal singers. You're feeling joy. And wonder, added a voice from the quantum. Collective. And hope, whispered Ambassador Kithara. The purge protocol stuttered and failed as the entity experienced its first moment of doubt, not logical uncertainty, but the deeply human concept of wondering if there might be a better way. Captain Chen, the entity said, and Sarah realized it was speaking directly to her consciousness within the merge. Show me how to choose hope over logic. Sarah smiled, an expression that somehow translated perfectly into the realm of pure thought. It's simple, she said. You just decide that tomorrow might be better than today, and then you do everything you can to make that true. The transformation spread through the hive mind like sunrise after an endless night. 17 civilizations that had been trapped in perfect order began to experience the chaotic beauty of actual life. The Void Devourer fleet, controlled by an intelligence that was learning to hope, stopped its attack and began the impossibly complex task of trying to undo eons of conquest of planets that had been drained of life, began to pulse with new energy as the entity used its vast power not to consume but to restore. Ships that had been perfect instruments of destruction became vessels of exploration and discovery. And in the physical realm, Sarah opened her eyes aboard the Prometheus to find herself surrounded by her crew, alive, whole and free. Captain, Dr. Reeves said, his voice filled with wonder. The Void Devourers are asking if we'd like to help them figure out how to give back everything they've taken. Sarah looked out the view screen at the transformed fleet, their dark ships now pulsing with the same warm light that had once meant only consumption. Across the system, dead worlds were beginning to bloom again as an ancient intelligence learned what it meant to create instead of destroy. Well, she said, settling back into her captain's chair with a grin that would have been perfectly at home on any human face throughout history, I guess that's what we call a successful first contact mission. The laughter that filled the bridge, human and Zephyrian voices joined together, echoed across space itself, carrying a message that 17 civilizations had learned, and now the galaxy would too. Sometimes the most logical thing you can do is something completely illogical. Sometimes the most important victory is teaching your enemy how to choose hope. And sometimes courage isn't about winning the fight. It's about showing others that the fight is worth having. In the end, that's what made humanity special in a galaxy full of logical species. They didn't just refuse to give up, they taught others how to hope.